Welcome back, Yinzers and Yinzettes, to the second episode of Pucks and Nat, where we'll give you the latest downtown breakdowns and basically everything you need to know about what happened in Penguins hockey this week. We have a good show for you today. Once again, we're going to be talking about the week in review. We're also going to be talking about a young player that's trending up and who has impressed so far. We'll give you the trending up, trending down, and then finally, we're going to talk a little bit of comparison between Pens and Caps. So stick around, and we'll talk about much more. Nat? All right. Welcome in again. I am one of your hosts, Kelsey Surmacz. I write for the Hockey News Penguins site. And just in case you need reminded, you can follow me on X at Kelsey_Surmacz4. It's the same thing on Threads, Blue Sky. There's just no underscore. And I am joined once again by my co-host, Hannah Kirkell, who has a little bit of a new byline this week.
Yeah. Hi, guys. I'm Hannah Kirkell. You can find me on Twitter at H_Kirk6. You can find me on Blue Sky at HKirk6, no underscore, and on Threads at Kirkell6. And I am contributing to the sporting news.
Woo! You can play the celebratory thing if you want. Courtesy of Mayano.
Sounds like the rain that's coming outside my apartment right now.
Yes, we
Speaking
are.
of, we are probably going to experience some minor technological glitches because we are under tornado warning.
Woo!
So if we freeze or, are impaled by flying shrapnel, are bad. We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience.
Yes, and as you can already see, I'm already starting to freeze. So life's going great. Already peak technology here. So
you might also let's see how much better it can get. How don't we? How bad?
Absolutely. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to talk about this week in review. So the last time we saw you guys was Friday. As we've mentioned in the past, this is going to normally be a Wednesday thing, and we're starting that this week. It's going to be every Wednesday. We're hoping to, get a few shorter shows in throughout the week as well. But basically, what's happened since Friday? Well, Friday started off. Oh my gosh, what did happen Friday?
Well,
that was like, the loss to the.
We released the show on Friday, so at that point in the day, Chris Letang was ruled out. He didn't travel with the team because of an illness, and Owen Pickering was called up. The Penguins then proceeded to play in Columbus, and
yes,
well, let me tell you, the cannon went off by my count 8 times if you include the one that they do when they take the ice and when they win. That is too many cannons.
Too many cannons.
Too many cannons. And it is just as horrific as the people have told me.
Yeah, you were in attendance, right?
Yes, I was. I did not know that the cannon went off when the Blue Jackets took the ice at the beginning of the game. And I saw Jesus. I was not expecting that.
Well, we're glad you're okay, Anna. You've been brought back to us.
I have a lovely picture of me facing my fears. My mother said I looked great. I said, thanks. It's the fear that it'll just go off and take me with it.
Yeah, and we've seen over the years videos of guys kind of getting scared off by the cannon too. So it's just, I have not experienced that for myself yet, but I plan to make a trip over there later this year. So we shall see. I don't like loud noises. I don't think I'm going to enjoy that.
You will not love it.
But yeah, speaking of, getting pummeled by cannon fire, Tristan Jarry gave up 5 goals on Friday to the Blue Jackets. They did add the empty netter at the end there. And that was just another rough outing for him. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I just say, including one on the first shot. And at that point, that marked 3 out of 4 starts where he let in a goal on the first shot he faced.
Correct. So another start that didn't go the way of Tristan Jarry, as has been the case for a lot of other starts this year. But anyway, so we jump forward to the
that
next
game,
day.
it was pretty doomed from the start, like legitimately the start. The Penguins did allow 2 goals, fairly quickly in the first 8 minutes. They allowed Zach Aston Reese, former Penguin, to score, and they got a goal on the power play from Zach Werenski. The Penguins did rally back and tie it. They got goals from Anthony Beauvillier and Michael Bunting. And then Columbus responded by scoring the next 4. So
Yeah.
that's how
As has been the
that
story
game
a lot.
went.
Yeah. And we've seen that before where the Pens just give up a chunk of unanswered goals towards the end of games. And we'll get to that in a second.
And that brings us
more.
to Saturday's game.
Yes. So Saturday's game, the very next day.
Oh, yeah.
The very next day. So yeah, I mean, it started off well. They went up 3-0. Got goals from Brian Rust and Jesse Puljujarvi, who we may or may not talk about a little bit later. But Rust and Puljujarvi score in the first period, and then you have Sidney Crosby adding a goal in the second. Things are great, but as anyone who has been watching the Pittsburgh Penguins, especially this season, knows, no lead is safe. No 2-goal lead.
Not a 3-goal lead, because Tyler Toffoli answers midway through the second period. And I think going into the third period, everyone kind of knew what was going to happen.
Absolutely.
They had a 2-goal lead going into the third period. Yeah, that obviously didn't stay. San Jose tied the game with less than 10 minutes to go in the third. I want to say it was 11:40 was the timestamp.
Yeah,
Tyler Toffoli scored twice, and Mikael Granlund, former Penguin, scored once.
Yeah, it was, and it's one of those things, you can pretty much write it in Sharpie at this point on the wall that if the Penguins have a lead going into the third period, especially a 2-goal lead, don't expect that to be holding up.
Don't expect that to, yeah.
Yeah, and they did get the shootout win, so there was a little bit to salvage, but they still blew that 3-goal lead.
Yes.
Which brings us to Tuesday, which was the first time they faced a former teammate, Jake Gensel, in the Tampa Bay Lightning. And once again, I mean, this was probably this was a heartbreaking loss because you look at the way the Penguins played in the first 40 minutes. I mean, this was clinical. Even in the second period when they weren't generating too many shots, they were still playing very well defensively. It looked like Mike Sullivan hockey from the Cup years for just a second there. And it was very resemblant of the Capitals game where the Penguins were kind of dictating the terms, controlling play, kind of controlling possession for the most part. They were opportunistic. Puljujarvi scored again in the first period, and then Rickard Rakell added his first goal in 9 games on the power play in the second period. So, I mean, things were trending up, and then once again, the guy who came back into the lineup after missing the last 4 with an injury, Braden Point, haunted the Penguins again. Certified Penguins killer.
Warm-ups.
Yes. Yeah, so he scored it to make it 2-1 in the third period. Anthony Cirelli added the tying goal a little more than halfway in, and then Point gets the overtime winner on, a play that Tristan Jarry probably wants to forget.
Yeah, I mean, once again, 2-goal lead going into the third, and surprise, surprise, it does not end up going their way. I believe I saw a statistic that they've blown 9 multi-goal leads this year already, which is ridiculous because this was like their 21st game.
Yeah. And what's crazy about this too, and I think you could debate all day about what the Penguins' true intentions are this year. We're not going to get too far into that, but it's one of those things. If they're going to lose, fine, they're going to lose, but you can't keep losing this way. Because
they can. Like, there's no stopping them. They can.
Yeah, the unfortunately, there's no stopping them. It doesn't seem like, we'll see if there's more moves. I do believe there's going to be more moves on the way. And in other news this week, too, just around the NHL, Jim Montgomery was fired by the Bruins, which, I mean, anybody in hockey circles knows Montgomery's a great coach. He's had great success in this league. Boston started off, as of the end of yesterday, they were 8-9-1, fourth in the Atlantic. So, I mean, a pedestrian start, but, that team is pretty serious about still trying to compete in the now. So I'm kind of following that storyline because Montgomery isn't going to be, jobless for very long.
No, I would assume that whoever is out next, he'll be the replacement. Whoever that may be, I think Jim Montgomery will slot into the next coaching vacancy.
Absolutely. And
he was, I mean, obviously this isn't a Bruins podcast, but he's pretty far from the problem in Boston.
Oh yeah. They have he he even called out Jeremy Swayman in the presser a little bit right before he got fired. So yeah, it's Penguins aren't the only team having problems. No, it never is. Never is. Listen, I mean, I know it's crazy too, but as we speak, the Penguins are still granted they've played more games than other teams, but somehow, some way they're still only a point out of a wild card, which is just it boggles the mind. It really does.
What happened to the sport I love?
It got very top heavy. That's what happened, Hannah.
No kidding.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's the week in review, but of all the negatives that's happened this week, there has been a little bit of positive too. And that brings us kind of to our next point. So a couple of the younger guys started to make an impression. We saw Owen Pickering and Vasily Ponomarev make their season debuts and Penguins debuts. And for Pickering, his NHL debut on Saturday in San Jose. And Ponomarev's been fine. He's a good defensive player. He made a few mistakes, the other day, rookie mistakes, I guess you could call them, on Tuesday. But I want to talk about Pickering for a minute because, this is a guy who he's 20 years old, drafted in the first round of 2022. So, I mean, still a pretty fresh face. And I think we kind of talked about this on last week's podcast, but I think a lot of people thought that his path to the NHL was going to take a little bit longer than it did, but obviously injuries and the roster situation kind of opened up an avenue for him to make his debut sooner, and he's impressed so far. Yeah,
he's been really good. He recorded a point, his first NHL point in his first NHL game. He's played 2 games so far, and he's been really solid in both of them. He saw some time on the top pairing with Erik Karlsson last night against Tampa. Granted, it was only for a few shifts and probably because Marcus Pettersson had just been out killing penalties, but still, it's an opportunity that he definitely made the most of. I thought he's played really well. Definitely better than I expected because he's a long, lanky defenseman, and those usually their game doesn't usually transfer instantly to the pros when they move up a league. So it was a little shocking, but he definitely exceeded expectations and then some.
Absolutely. And you think about some of these just in general, like the young defensemen we've seen this year, and you can count Harrison Brunet kind of in this category too. The Penguins, they have a legitimate prospect, it seems, on the left side and the right side. And what's interesting about the current situation with Pickering, now Letang did practice today on Wednesday. He was back to full practice with the team. Now, granted, practice was a little thin. There weren't too many attendees today. And Mike Sullivan said it was just workload management. A lot of the guys that played heavy minutes, against Tampa on Tuesday were given the day off. But Letang did practice. But we've seen Mike Sullivan and even Letang today. I think they're getting to the point where they're not afraid to, call out the fact that there are some individuals who are not performing to expectations. And Mike Sullivan was as angry as I've seen him, since I've been working this beat, which has been a short time, obviously, but he was angry last night. And he basically emphatically said, we need guys to commit to playing defense. Like there are guys that are not committing to playing defense. And, it makes you wonder if Pickering might stick around for a little bit, because the fact that he's getting some of those top minutes with Erik Karlsson, even if they're few and far between, Matt Grzelcyk, it's been a struggle for him this season. Obviously, Ryan Graves has been scratched for the past 2 contests. Not sure if we're going to see that again. But, it'll be interesting to see if he continues to factor into this lineup, because he's been one of their better defensemen these past 2 games.
Yeah, he definitely has. And granted, the sample size is small, since he's primarily been getting sheltered minutes, and it's only been 2 games. But, stranger things have happened, Kelsey. Mike Sullivan didn't like their compete level last night. So I don't claim to see the future, but I wouldn't be too surprised if he stuck around.
Yeah.
It's not like he's done anything to show that he shouldn't. In fact, I'd argue the opposite. I'd say he definitely has showed that he's making it hard for them to send him back down. Pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And there's something that Letang has said today after practice that I thought was kind of interesting. And I'm just reading the quote here real quick. He said, basically somebody asked him, what everything boils down to as far as their struggles and why they're struggling. And he said, I think it's for the most part a problem of individual, and it's translated into team performance. So again, it's one of those things, you see the head coach after last night's game and several other games, kind of not by name most of the time, but singling out the fact that there are certain people that are not committing to the structure they want to play. Letang, seemed to kind of point out that individuals, and that might even be a collective individual here. So you're talking about just individuals doing things that are contributing to a collective team collapse, obviously. But given all that, and I think, a lot of that is evident on the blue line, as we've said, the way Pickering's playing right now, he's using his size really well and advantageously in the defensive zone. We've seen what he can do on offense too. I mean, he looks comfortable on the offensive blue line as well, and as evidenced by that pass that he made to Drew O'Connor before Jesse Puljujärvi's goal to get his first assist. So I think it's just a matter of performance, like Sullivan said, and I do think that unlike in years past, we may actually see some of these younger players rewarded for performance, and Pickering's definitely one of them. But
I think the main difference between right now and years past is that there are actually prospects who not only are performing well in the AHL, but who the team believes will be NHL roster players. I mean, up right now, you've got Poulin, you've got Ponomarev, you've got Owen Pickering, but there are still some guys down in the AHL who, there's Rutger McWherty, there's Tristan Brose, there's Billy Koivunen.
Yeah.
So it feels a little bit unfair to say, unlike in the past, when in the past there hasn't really been anyone, even if there have been performers down in the AHL, there hasn't been a great prospect pool to pull from.
Yeah. And I think that is a stark, difference to years past as well. And as you said, I mean, I think that the organization actually believes in these players and they want to give them opportunities. And I mean, I think you can include Joel Blomqvist in there too.
Yes.
The goaltender, obviously. But there's, they have some legit talent that is kind of waiting in the wings. And we've talked about this before. It's just a matter of time before these guys are up. With the Penguins cap situation next year, they have a lot of open cap space. They have some expiring contracts that they're going to sell off. So there's a good chance we see a lot of these guys sooner than we might think. And Pickering was a little ahead of schedule, but I think the same is going to go for guys like Bros and Koivunen. And even Bemstrom's playing really well down there too. I know he's not a prospect, but those guys are probably going to see NHL ice sooner than we think they are. So, yeah, just want to. Speaking of again players playing well, there's not a whole lot of them right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, we want to apologize in advance for this segment because right now, when the team is playing well, it really looks like they're doing it collectively, and the same can be said for when they're playing poorly. So it was it was a little bit more difficult this week to single out players that are trending up and trending down, but we gave it our best shot.
So yes, Hannah kind of introduced it, but it is time for our trending up, trending down segment.
Kelsey,
so
who do you have that's trending up?
My player that's trending up this week, and I actually do think he's legitimately trending up, is Jesse Puljujärvi. Again, thank you for the sound from Mayano there. But anyway, yeah, Jesse Puljujärvi. If I could pull a needle out of a haystack right now, like a really, really rough looking haystack, it's Jesse Puljujärvi. He's got goals in 2 straight games. And we've seen, flashes all year from him. And right now, I mean, he's sitting at 3 goals, 8 points in 18 games on the season. When you look at those numbers on the surface, there's nothing super that jumps out about that. But the thing I like about Puljujärvi's game, and if you watch, that third line, especially that he's playing on right now with Poland and O'Connor, he's really driving the play on that line. And that shows in some of the analytics as well. For example, he's second in expected goal share with 59.6, and that's only behind Blake Lizotte, which is a pretty good indicator that he's generating a lot of chances right now. And that's with guys who aren't really generating a whole lot on their own. So I would really like to see Puljujärvi get an elevated opportunity at some point. I do like the Penguins' top 6 right now as it stands. Obviously, things fluctuate, chemistry fades, goes in and out. I think there'll be an opportunity for him to slot in at some point. But, this is a valuable player for the Penguins. He doesn't really provide much in the way defensively, but, in the offensive zone, he's just getting it done. And he's one of the few players right now, I think, that are making a positive impact. He's limiting mistakes. He's not really doing too much to hurt the team. And, I'd really like to see his minutes elevated and his role elevated, because just a side note, I do want to talk for a second about ice time too, because this is something I brought up the other day, but Jesse Puljujärvi was 3rd from the bottom in ice time against Tampa Bay Lightning. He only played 10 minutes, 13 seconds. The only 2 players that played less were Ponomarev and Poland. And, they played 8:36 and 9:49 respectively. So, all 3 of those guys were top 5 in game score last game. And, you look at the situation with the Penguins. Obviously, bottom 6 guys who aren't seeing much time on special teams aren't going to get as much ice time. That's just the way of things. The less you're deployed in special team situations, Puljujärvi's on the second unit, the power play unit, but they haven't been getting much ice time. So naturally, those minutes are going to be smaller. But you even look at a guy like Drew O'Connor, you look at Matt Nieto, Noel Acciari, they were all getting around 15 minutes of ice time. So I'd like to see Puljujärvi's minutes elevated because I think he's earned them. And, I think he's earned perhaps a look, a little bit more of a look on the power play too. I'm not sure who you take off. There's not really anybody to take off of that first unit right now. It's kind of actually gelling pretty well. But I just want to see him get more minutes, and I want to see him in a more elevated role.
I completely agree. As far as the power play goes, you can't really tweak that right now because even when they're not scoring, it's it's not like last year. This isn't a power
Yeah.
play where you're just desperately throwing things at a wall to see what sticks. I'm not sure where you would slot him into the top 6 when healthy, because right now it's gelling well.
Yeah.
And you could argue take Bavillier off that top line, but I'm sure the Penguins would love to keep him up there to keep increasing his trade value for the inevitable upcoming trade deadline flip.
Yeah. Elevating his minutes right now is going to be pretty hard. I mean, as you said,
Right.
you don't want to fix something that's not broken with this power
Right.
play. Like, for
But-
crying out loud, it's working. Don't touch it.
Yeah, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But
Yeah.
I'm the first sign of injury. I would love him to get a slot, get a shot up in that top 6, slot in. Ooh, I'm really jumbling my words. But yeah, right now you can't really tweak it, but he's got to be on the short list for a promotion.
Absolutely. And even just in terms of ice time, it seems like the fourth line is getting more minutes right now than the third line. And
Not Ponomarev, though.
not him, everybody else. But yeah, it's so I think just in terms of ice time, it would just be nice to see him get that third line in general get a little bit more runway in games, and not just Drew O'Connor. Drew O'Connor is getting a lot of ice time. He even saw like some double shifting with the fourth line in place of Ponomarev on Tuesday, which we're not going to get into that today.
No, we talked extensively about Drew O'Connor on the last segment, and yeah, that's all we're going to say about that.
We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think we may have name dropped already, but Hannah, who is your player that's trending up?
Well, this one is a little tricky because we would love to talk about Anthony Bavillier again. We already did that on the last on the last episode, but we're going to again a little bit, just because he has been gelling really well in that top line. In that game against Columbus, he factored in on the only 2 goals. He had the first goal and a primary assist on the second, which came on the power play from the second unit, might we add. Just some general stats. He's 5th on the team in hits. He's got 29 of them. He's the 3rd forward behind Noel Acciari with 49 and Rickard Rakell with 36. He's taken 2 penalties and drawn 5. Ooh. He's got 1.16 expected goals per 60. He's shooting at a 12.5% clip, which is not so bad.
Not at all.
Yeah, he and when he's not at his best, he's not detrimental to the on-ice product. He's just kind of a body, because even when he's at his worst, he's still fast and making things happen with his speed, forechecking, back-checking. I mean, so even when he's, even at his worst, he's still doing pretty okay, which is very impressive considering the state of how this team is panning out, I guess.
Yeah, and I do want to make a note too that he was tied for the team lead in blocked shots against Tampa. He blocked 3 shots, and
was he really?
Yeah, he's getting it done in the defensive zone too, and I like his play away from the puck. And Mike Sullivan has mentioned that too. That's why they continue to deploy him in those situations. He has seen some time on the penalty kill as well. So I mean, he's earned those minutes. And I think it's safe to say, we mentioned this last week too, but keeps playing this way, there should be a pretty good deal for him at the deadline. So
absolutely. I mean, cheap contract. He's playing pretty well. That's not going to be tough to move.
No, definitely not. And Hannah, you forgot to give him the cheer. Want to give
Oh,
Anthony
yeah,
Beauvillier
I
a cheer
did.
real quick?
That's right. Anthony Beauvillier, folks. We also wanted to very briefly talk about Matt Nieto, just because he hadn't played in almost an entire year since November 30th, 2023. He's played in 3 games. Um, he's done well on the penalty kill. Um, he's played above what I expected after such a long return from injury. I didn't really expect him to just jump back into the lineup with that speed that he provides. I figured it would take some easing in and shaking off the rust, but he pretty much hopped right in and got right to his game, which is good because a defensive forward is not a bad thing on this team. There are not many.
Absolutely. Yeah. Defensively responsible forwards or something in short supply for the Penguins. And yeah, I agree. You could argue that he's trending up because he's not dead. So
Yeah,
he's
I
here.
was contemplating making him my trending up player, but it felt a little bit unfair because there wasn't a sample size before these 3 games. Kelsey did point out that he's trending, just being on the ice is trending up because he's no longer on injured reserve. So
he exists. So
yeah,
that's what
cheers
matters.
for Matt Nieto, everybody.
Yes. Hey, thank you for existing, Matt, and thank you for your contributions through 3 games so far. All right, so we're gonna get to the other half of this segment, which is a whole lot easier, it seems.
Yeah.
We're gonna
Actually, I mean, it's a little difficult because when the whole team is kind of trending down as a whole, it's hard to isolate, but we've done our best. Kelsey, who is trending down?
Alex Nedeljkovic is trending down.
Ow!
By the way, thank you for those who gave their input on our trending down sound effect. We're probably gonna laugh every time, but it's totally worth it.
I'm going for the Oscar. I'm gonna conceal, don't feel.
All right, you got it. I don't have that kind of strength. I can't. There's no hiding it for me. But yeah. So, anyways, trending down. Alex Nedeljkovic. Now, I think if anybody's paid attention to the Penguins' goaltending, even into last season, I don't think anybody at any point has thought that Alex Nedeljkovic is a game changer. And he's been a serviceable backup for the Penguins, a serviceable 1B. He obviously went on a pretty decent run at the end of last season, where he started 13 straight games. And almost helped the Penguins get to the playoffs. Now, granted, towards the end of that run, his numbers started to dip a little bit, but the team was playing well in front of him. That always helps, right? Well, this season, it does seem like the team is playing a little better in front of him, and there was, a graphic provided by all 3 zones. I believe Jay Fresh shared it the other day on X, but basically, it's showing that in terms of defense, the team actually, in front of Nedeljkovic in particular, isn't playing all that terrible, especially in comparison to Yoel Blomqvist and Tristan Jarry, whom they're playing absolutely putrid defense in front of. But Alex Nedeljkovic just isn't getting it done this year in terms of high danger saves, his goals against average. I mean, you look across the league, goals against average is up in droves. This isn't like goals against average is a pretty moot statistic whenever you're looking at a team as defensively inept as the Penguins are. But his goals against average is now 3.17. He's got an 886 save percentage. The 900 save percentage is a little bit of a dying art in the league. There's a lot of guys that are kind of trending under 900 nowadays. But I think what Nedeljkovic has kind of proven time and time again is that he gives you a couple good games, but then once he starts consecutive games, that's when you start to see why he's a backup. And I just think in these last several games, his game has been trending down in the sense that he's not making some of those big saves that he was even at the beginning of this season. You ask him about his performances, and he's probably the most brutally honest person in that locker room, and he'll tell you that, he hasn't had his best recently. So he's my player that's trending down. I do think it's something to keep an eye on too. I mentioned in last week's segment that he might be a guy down the road to keep an eye on in the trade market. So yeah, I mean, in terms of goaltending, it's been a mess for the Penguins in general. But as I don't want to say bad, but I'm going to say it, like, as bad as it's been for Tristan Jarry this season, Nedeljkovic hasn't really been providing much in the way of anything special for the Penguins either.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to fault the guy because, I mean, he's a backup. He's a 1B. He's not making the saves in positions he probably shouldn't be in, because again, he's not a guy that is going to rip off like 65 starts in a year like Connor Hellebuck. But yeah, he's definitely trending down as
Yeah, and I do want to point out one more thing too. And I don't have the updated stats in front of me, but his shot volume is also a lot lower than Jarry's and Blomqvist's. So that's another thing to keep an eye on too. Just the volume of shots he's facing isn't as high as the other two. Blomqvist has faced a ridiculous volume of shots,
which tracks because the Penguins
yeah.
have been playing fairly well defensively, or like fairly well by their standards defensively in front of Nedeljkovic, and Jarry and Blomqvist are just being left high and dry.
Yeah, they're being pummeled with shots. And that's the reason that even despite that Dallas disaster game with Blomqvist starting that his save percentage was still above 900 after that because he's just making so many saves. So that's my player that's trending down. Hannah, who is your player that's trending down?
Matt Grzelcyk.
Ow!
That sound effect seems pretty accurate.
Yeah. I kind of struggle to find the words because it, by all accounts, doesn't make sense why the mistakes he makes are just very fundamental routine mistakes. But let's talk about some of the stats. He's got 14 giveaways, and 11 of them have come in the defensive zone. Kelsey, do you think that is good?
No.
Yeah. His on-ice goals share is 42.9%. That is also not good.
Especially for a top pair defenseman.
Right, which he is being deployed as when Chris Letang is, well, I guess. No, I mean, even when
he's been back and
healthy,
forth.
they were. He kind of is being toggled back and forth between a second and first pairing defenseman. The top four have been kind of playing the switcheroo game. They've been playing hot potato with each other. But he's been the top pairing defenseman for at least 50% of the games. I would hazard a guess. But yeah, his on-ice expected goal share is 51.9%. Also not good. And the eye test, he doesn't look great. He's consistently in the bottom 5 on the game card.
Hockey stat card, game
Hockey stat card,
yeah.
That's the one. He's definitely trending down. He started the year fairly well. I mean, apart from that New York game, which I kind of pretend didn't happen because everyone played so poorly. You just kind of say, apart from this game, or you always got to point out that you're not factoring that in because everybody laid an egg. But he started the year fairly well. The first 3 or 4 games he was playing well. And then it's just been a steady decline from there that's become a little bit more rapid in the past 5 games or so.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely been rough, and even on the first goal against yesterday, against Tampa, that was rough. I think there was a little bit of an issue with the line change with Carlson going off. Grizzlick and Pickering both came on. They're both left side defensemen, so there was obviously a little bit of
A little
a
bit of
mix up
disconnect
that
there.
happened, but he completely just got walked by Point. And this is something that we're seeing with consistency. And I mean, to be fair to him, he has been pretty decent in the offensive zone. He's gotten a little bit of power play time. He looks to be pretty comfortable on the power play. But I mean, outside of those situations, it's been a little tough to watch, to be honest. And you look at the situation with the roster, and Graves has been seeing the scratch the last couple games. To be honest with you, aside from that Columbus game, which was an absolute disaster for Ryan Graves, he's been probably one of their better defensive defensemen this year. And
I would actually argue that he's been their best defensive defenseman this year, because Marcus Pettersson has not had the greatest start to the season. Yeah, personally, that Ryan Graves was scratched over Matt Grizzlick, I wasn't expecting, and don't really agree with. I mean, I'm not the coach. Maybe Sullivan is privy to some information or a level of understanding that I am not, but
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, if they continue to play this way, there's going to be lineup shakeups up and down. I mean, I think you're going to see some guys rotating in and out. I do expect Graves to rotate in again at some point, but again, with the emergence of Pickering, if he continues to play this way, it's going to make things a whole lot more interesting on that left side, to see who is kind of the odd guy out, because until Pettersson is no longer playing for the Penguins, because he's inevitably going to get traded at some point, he's going to slot in there. So it's going to be interesting to see if again, Pickering continues to play the way that he has played through these two games, who slots out between Graves and Grizzlick. And I think that might be more of a rotating carousel going forward. And also don't forget that Grizzlick is on a 1-year contract. So this also might be a guy that they're still trying to hope his game trends up a little bit to hopefully be able to flip. But right now it's not trending the right way, that's for sure. So yeah, I mean, aside from that, we have one last thing for you today before we sign off.
That we're going to have to kind of speed run and do very briefly, because we definitely talked a little bit more than we should have, but
that's who we are, though. We have fun on here. We get into, both of us just sometimes talk in circles, but that's okay. We're here, and it's our podcast. We're Pucks.
That is true. And I know Kelsey has been very, very excited to talk about this. So the floor is yours.
Man, I will keep this as brief as possible, but I have seen a lot of takes on in the world of X, Blue Sky, wherever you consume your social media, in the media room, pretty much everywhere in the hockeyverse, about comparing the Capitals and the Penguins rebuild situations. And I do think it's interesting. I don't want to say there's some revisionist history on Washington's, but I kind of think there is a little bit. Because let's consider the situation. So last season, Washington was kind of in a very similar position to where the Pens are this season. They made the playoffs by accident. They were not a good team. One of the worst goal differentials in recent memory. They made the playoffs pretty much by accident. They really weren't trying to. And then, a lot of situations just happened to kind of turn in their fortunes. This summer, they had a little bit of cap room to work with. Obviously, Oshie and Backstrom are on long-term IR, which has also factored in, but they were able to go get Chychrun. They got Mangiapane, both players that have panned in. They have some of the young guys coming up that have really made an impact. So they've had a good start to the season. Now with Ovi down, we'll see if that continues, because that's a really big blow for them, obviously. But I think in a sense, there's a lot of people talking about the management of the Capitals and the mismanagement of the Penguins. And I don't think you look at the end of the Jim Rutherford era, the Ron Hextall era, and some of the signings that Dubas has made in free agency, I think an argument could be made, obviously, that the Penguins have been mismanaged to some degree, to a large degree. But I do think, in a sense, though, it's almost like the Penguins are a year behind where the Capitals are. And if you look at the situation, so the Penguins are stockpiling picks this year. They're trying to rebuild on the fly. They are going to have $22 million plus to work with this summer. They're going to have a whole cupboard of assets and draft picks, as Kyle Dubas is going to trade off more contracts. They already have a lot of draft picks next season. They have a lot to work with to really retool this roster in the offseason to take another shot at it next year. Now, whether or not that pans out obviously remains to be seen. But I think next season, you may find the Penguins in a similar situation to where the Capitals are now, where they're good enough to compete. They've overturned their roster a little bit, but, the jury's out on whether or not this strategy is going to work. But from a management perspective, I don't see the two teams as much different. Just in terms of the timeline, it's just that the Penguins are a year behind where the Capitals are. And on that note, the Capitals also got a new coach. So that's something else that remains to be seen with the Penguins as well. But just wanted to point that out. I think it's worth noting that the Penguins are just a little bit behind on the timeline.
Yeah, I don't know if that I would agree in saying that the Penguins could be where the Capitals are next year. Just because, like you said, those two contracts, TJ Oshie and Nicholas Backstrom on injured reserve, the Penguins aren't gonna be in that spot. They're not
Hopefully
going to have right. So that's the only point I would disagree with. But yeah, they're both going the same direction. It's just that the Penguins got to it a year later, like Kelsey said.
Yeah. And, we'll see how it pans out. There's still a lot of season left. There's, a lot of draft picks to still be had. So we'll see what Dubas does next year or so. But, once next season turns in, I think that's a good time to start judging the job he's done in rebuilding this prospect and draft pool. Because also we're going to see some younger players really make an impact next season, I think, that we won't necessarily see as much this season. But all right. Well, thanks, folks. Thank you for sticking with us. We promise we won't run as long next week, or we won't try to.
I believe that's what we said last week.
We're just going to keep saying it till it happens. We're under 50 minutes, so we're a little bit ahead of last week's schedule. But just as a reminder, Hannah, where can they find you?
I am on Twitter at H_Kirk6. I'm on Blue Sky at HKirk6, no underscore. I'm on Threads at Kirkell6. And I'm going to be contributing to the Sporting News.
Congratulations again. And as a reminder for me, I write for the Hockey News Penguins site. You can find my work on there. You can follow me on Twitter at Kelsey_Surmacz4. Same thing on Threads, and same thing on Blue Sky minus the underscore. So we thank you, Yinzers, Yinzets, for sticking with us again today. As a reminder, we'll come back at you next Wednesday. So you all have a great close to the week, and let's hope that there is, a lot of news to talk about next week, whether that's good or bad.
Or let's hope that something crazy happens that we have to drop an emergency reaction episode.
Or maybe a live stream.
That'd be fun.
Maybe.
Anyway,
we'll see.
Guys,
yes.
Peace out. Be good to each other. Stay out of trouble and that.